All right, welcome to our YouTube channel. My name is Lloyd Ross, and I'm here to teach you all the things about money that you wish you learned in school. So this particular lesson today is all about property and owning a home. I don't own a home. Can you believe that? I know. The great Australian dream averts me. I haven't achieved it. The great Australian dream of owning a property. Yeah, it hasn't happened for me yet. Not that I don't want it to. Could have bought a house years and years ago. But why don't I own a house? And is it really the great Australian dream or the American dream? You know, what's the whole idea behind owning a home? Am I against it? No. I think owning a home's great, but there's reasons why I haven't done it, and I think there's a time for everything. I did a podcast episode on it. There's this term called house poor. Are you house poor? I think I asked in the episode. And people that are house poor, what I mean by that is that they've got a property that they live in, but they're broke. They don't live the dream. So if the great Australian dream is to buy a house, then what I often find is that people that have done that, they don't often live a real dream life. They just don't. And I looked at that and I was like, because I'm really unconventional. Well, I'm largely unconventional with my approach to things. And that's why my books are called Money Buys Happiness and Grows on Trees, because, you know, it's about being a contrarian. And I think that helps you a lot to build wealth if you're a contrarian, if you go against the crowd, whether it be in your investing, your thought process, how you do things. I think it's an important mental model to understand, being a contrarian against the crowd. And so I went against the crowd and I didn't buy a house because what I realized was I thought to myself, in my 20s, I was like, do I really want to have a debt burden so big that I have to put on the golden handcuffs? Now, the golden handcuffs are where you've got so much debt across your house and cars and family obligations that you can't resign from your job. You can't build a business and you've got golden handcuffs. You're like, I'm stuck here in this job that I hate because I've created too many obligations. And so you don't want to be a slave to debt. And I didn't want to be a slave to debt. And the most common debt that people get, and they usually get bite off more than they can chew, is a massive home mortgage. I never wanted that because I thought, well, if I want to be really successful and happy, by the way, then having a big debt load was not, I had no interest in that. So I was like, I'm not signing up for that class. Why would I do that? Because what I've seen, and I've had conversations with people. This lady I had a conversation with. She said, Lloyd, I want to be wealthier. I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, I want to have cash flow and passive income. I'm like, what do you mean? Why? And she said, I want freedom. I'm like, freedom from what? She goes, my job. I'm like, okay, you got investment? She's like, yeah, I got this. Okay, well, what's preventing you? She says, well, I've got all these houses. I'm like, yeah. And she goes, well, why am I like struggling to like get ahead? And why am I've got to have side hustles and I'm not earning enough and I can't go on holidays. And I'm like, that's horrible. She says, well, I've got $6 million of real estate and I got $3 million worth of debt. So I was like, well, you've got a net worth of $3 million. And she's like, yeah. I'm like, that's amazing. You're a multimillionaire. She goes, I don't feel like I am. I'm like, you're house poor. You have all of your money tied up in your principal place of residence where you live, and you've got debts, and now you have obligations, and you have to continue to stay on that hamster wheel to make that work. You know, if she had sold all of her property for $6 million, okay, for example, paid off the $3 million in debt, she'd have $3 million clear cash, boom, right, roughly. And so she put that into some sort of index fund that pays a dividend of, let's say, even 4%. 4 times 3 is 1.2. $120,000 a year in income she would have created for herself, and she could live in Bali for the rest of her life and be happy. So why does she do that, right? What's going on there? That's weird, right? Happiness or property? Happiness or property? I'm all for happiness, personally. That's why I think money buys happiness. But people don't spend it right. That's why they can't buy happiness with it. They're spending all the stuff that creates sadness. It's not money's fault. It's your fault. Stop spending money on stuff that creates sadness. And unfortunately, that's big mortgages. It's like, do I want to be financially unpeaceful? No, then don't do that. It's not the be-all and end-all to buy a house, for goodness sake. It's not the Australian dream. It's a dumb dream. It's a nightmare. It's the Australian nightmare for a lot of people, right? And they just accumulate property after property after property. It's just full of debt. And watch this. When rates go up, interest rates are going up drastically at the moment. They're increasing by 0.5% all the time. Probably the next for the next few rate rises. They're going to hurt. They go, oh, that was a really dumb idea. There's a time and a place for a home. If you want to own your place to raise a family and have great memories and you don't get too much debt and you know where you're going to live, you know where you're going to go to school, and you know you're going to stay there for 20, 30 years, buy a house. Makes sense, right? Warren Buffett bought his house in the 60s, I think, 50s, for $40,000. And he's lived in it his whole life. Has it accumulated in value? Yes. Has he had to pay rent or mortgage payments? No. Smart, right? I'm all for that. But what I'm not for is people doing it because they think it's a rite of passage. They have to own a house to be successful. That's bullshit. A lot of my friends that don't own properties, that they own businesses and skills and nice liquid investments that produce cash flow, are way more successful in terms of how happy they are than my friends who have got a flipping massive mortgage, a shitty job they can't retire from, and all of a sudden an obligation. Like, it compromises things. Why would you do that? It's still okay to buy a house in your 40s. It's still okay. Look, if you do it properly and you buy a property when the market's down in your 40s, appropriately with the right equity, cash deposit, with doing the things you've loved to do, and you build a good business and you're doing what you love, that's way better than buying something at the peak of the market in your 20s because someone's forced you to do it, and then you're bound in a job you hate or a trade that you hate. Way better. So why are you in a rush? You can't take the property with you anyway. It's like when you die, like, what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to give it to my kids and blah, blah. Well, fine, but they're not going to inherit that till they're 60. It's not going to change their life, right? Not until you die. By then, their whole career's over. So I wouldn't think of that like that. I would think of it in terms of, I think it's a sensible financial decision to own a home for sure. I'm not arguing that. But I think the timing of it and how it's done and who's doing it at what time matters the most. And people think it's the path to happiness when their money and their wealth, and it ain't. Primarily because it's not just the mortgage you pay back. It's insurance, it's rates, it's upkeep, and there's this weird thing that kills people financially. And what I mean by that is, when I was talking to that lady about her $6 million in houses and $3 million in debt, I appeared wealthier to her, even though I wasn't. I didn't have $3 million sitting there in cash, right? But what I've created for myself is flexibility, ways of earning different income streams, no debt, and nice quality assets that produce income that has allowed me to have freedom, which is really the wealth that I love. And that was the wealth that she wanted, but she was wealthier than me on paper in net worth. Does that make sense? That's weird, right? So she wanted what I had, but she had more than I have, or had, right? So what is it we're trying to achieve here when we're trying to buy houses? Is it actual freedom and income and wealth? Or is it actually keeping up with the Joneses? Perceived security? Oh, I want to be secure. I'm like, you think getting $1 million worth of debt secure? In rising rate environment? You're kidding me. It's perceived security. She was addicted to perceived security. And I think people think, oh, rent money's dead money. Not if you put your other money into investments, or you buy or build a business, or increase yourself in value, or you have happiness, then it's not dead money. It's wonderful money. Remember, money has to buy happiness, otherwise it buys nothing at all. Just be careful of that. But what I was going to say is that people I talk to that are really like, have this massive vision, like, what do you want to do? I want to live in Bali and I want to have freedom and I don't want to have this shitty job anymore and I want to create memories. I'm like, awesome. What's preventing you doing that? Oh, I've got a massive mortgage. We just bought a pool. We put that in the house. We just upgraded our deck and now we've got all this debt and we have to stay in a job. I'm like, well, that was dumb. Why would you do that? You don't have to play that game, by the way. You can sell your house today and you can play this game, right? You can, okay? Because you can't take your house with you. Life goes very fast. So why play that game? Play this game. So what happens when people own a house is this. There's a weird psychological, I wouldn't say a bias. I guess it's a bias. It's kind of like a fallacy, something happens psychologically and the nesting instincts kick in and they start having to upgrade their house. So it's like, we have to put a pool in. Now we have to put a deck. We have to get a new kitchen, honey. See where I'm going with this? You're spending your after-tax dollars at your job, after-tax dollars, on things in your house that have no tax deduction, that don't actually create much value in it. And even if it did, let's say a pool, spend the money, creates value, you don't see the value until you sell. So you're siphoning all of your cash into a house that's it's not producing any income to you or any happiness, right? For that matter, okay? Usually, your kitchen might make you happy for 5 minutes, but you'll get over it. So I think a lot of people spend their money on fixing up their house, and that's where their money goes. Whereas it could go into an asset that produces income, or it could go on starting a business, or it could go on freeing themselves of debt. Like, that's so much more important than a flipping new kitchen. So I think be careful of that game. Be careful of, my parents said I must buy a house, rent money's dead money, so I must buy a house today as soon as possible. Be careful of FOMO, like all the people just went into the housing market recently, just bought at the peak of the market, right? Watch it'll fall. And they're just doing that because they're on automation. They're being told to do it by their folks or whatever, and they're just moving this old legacy into the new legacy. It's just passed down from generation to generation. But the new rich are creating freedom and flexibility and time and love for what they do. And you can do that so well now without owning a house. How do I know? Because I'm living proof of that. I don't own a house. I have no debt. We're millionaires and we've never had debt. Okay? Or a house. Is it possible? Of course. It's way more fun. My God, my wife and I travel more than anyone I know. We're on 66 airplanes in 2019. We help more people. We have more fun. We sleep well at night. We have no obligations and debt. We are not susceptible to interest rate rises. We have investments to produce cash flow. We have 2 wonderful businesses. We have fun. What the heck? We don't own a house. Will we? Yeah, at some point, if it makes sense financially, we would. If the market fell drastically, we'd get a good home. If it made sense with a family, sure. I think it's so much more important to have happiness and freedom than it is to have a thing. Because, rent money's not that money. We flip and hang pictures up. People go, I want to be able to hang pictures on the wall. I'm like, we do that all the time. We're doing that for 10 years. We've lived in the same place paying rent for 10 years. And our rent's only gone up by like 3% a year in 10 years. It's ridiculously good. And the rest of the money we've put into investments. We've got home offices, okay, some deductions there. When the dishwasher breaks, we get a new one. There's some advantages to renting too, okay? It gives you flexibility, and flexibility is power. It allows you to make decisions. When I resigned from my corporate job, the others around me couldn't resign because they had obligations. And that's when I learned, one of the best lessons in my 20s that I learned about money was, don't box yourself in. Be flexible. Be able to test things out. Flirt with careers. Do different things. That's when your testing time happens. You can't do it when you've got obligations and family. You just can't, like when you're older. Okay, so, well, you can. You can. If you're unhappy, go for it. That's the lesson I don't want to box myself in. Because there was people I saw who had a lot of property during the GFC and they got wiped out. And so I'm a GFC baby, right? So I've seen that. And a lot of the generation haven't seen that happen. They're only seeing now what happens when rates go up. They're only seeing now what happens when debt's expensive. They're only seeing now what happens if they've spent all their money and not invested. They're only seeing now what happens if they haven't skilled up. They're seeing it now. So it'll come home to roost, but I don't want you to be that person. So don't be in a rush to buy a house. Understand what you're getting into. The house next door is probably not the best investment you've ever made in your whole life, okay? Look elsewhere besides that. And don't bite off more than you can chew. Don't handcuff yourself to a shitty job you don't like. You don't have to do that, right? So that's House Poor. That's the episode. If you're enjoying the lessons here, please subscribe to our channel and help us build the greatest financial education channel on YouTube. And of course, leave some comments, share the love, and I'll see you in the next lesson.